Brian William Spellman, 20355 Sherman Way, apartment 328, Winnetka, California, 91306-3142, area code 818-456-4289, cell phone, area code 818-914-5691, land phone. And this is my story in a three-part video. From www.lulu.com/Brian_Spellman. Evaluation of the interview, Brian Spellman's evaluation of the interview with Sergeant Detective John Robertson and Bryan Calvin Hartnell. Also contained in my book called Just Like You, in which I accuse Hartnell of murdering Cecelia Ann Shepard. And also my book on celebrity serial killers called Serial Sightseeing. I'll read the last page to you. The Weenie. Bryan Calvin Hartnell murdered Cecelia Ann Shepard at Lake Berryessa and then fabricated a ruse killer as his fall guy. The hooded, masked man never appeared at Lake Berryessa on September 27, 1969. On September 28th, Hartnell and Sergeant Detective John Robertson conducted the official police interview at Queen of the Valley Hospital, NSO Case 105907, now a sequestered recording transcribed by M. Feurle. In my Brian Spellman screenplay, Just Like You, I plan to expose Hartnell and question Robertson for either incompetence or complicity, if he's still alive. And, the ambulance driver, Sergeant Detective Collins, was a liar. Cecelia Shepard was out like a light, and he never talked to her, and she never described this phony baloney ruse suspect. So I read an evaluation of the interview, and then also gave a speech about the interview before that. And this will be a three-part video to be uploaded on YouTube on April 8th, 2019, Monday at 9:45 a.m. Just like you. Yes, hello. I'm Brian Spellman. Letter dated March 8, 2013. FBI Special Agent Dr. Greg Vecchi, Behavioral Profiling. Dear Dr. Vecchi, I remain perplexed where to have my proposal read for most efficient results. Mine offers an alternative to the ever-malingering cold case of the San Francisco Zodiac. For reasons I do not fully understand, this matter did not enter FBI jurisdiction, despite terrorist overtones. Nevertheless, I have evaluated my accusation of Bryan Hartnell as perpetrator, not victim, from unconventional perspective. Well aware that homicide evaluation begins with crime scene and victim backstory, I believe that I understand why this approach has repeatedly failed to classify Hartnell as a person of interest, or more emphatically, suspect. For obvious reasons, I would like initial containment and discretion to guide my proposal to both the right source to obtain the right results. I understand that I only offer a piece towards reconstructing a more accurate story. My current apprehension concerns whom and where to turn. Brian William Spellman, 20355 Sherman Way, number 328, Winnetka, California, 91306-3142, 818-456-4289, Spelly78@hotmail.com. Copped out. Kamala D. Harris, Attorney General, State of California, Department of Justice, Public Inquiry Unit, July 8th, 2013. Public Inquiry Unit 536675. Dear Mr. Spellman, thank you for correspondence with the Office of the Attorney General requesting that a crime be investigated and that the alleged perpetrator of the crime be prosecuted. If you have additional information about a crime, please continue to work with the police or sheriff's department in the area where the crime occurred. Local law enforcement authorities are responsible for investigating violations of law within their jurisdictions. After investigating a crime, the local law enforcement authorities may forward the case to the county district attorney's office for prosecution, if appropriate. Their decision whether or not to file criminal charges will then be made by the locally elected district attorney. We hope this information will be helpful to you. Thank you again for contacting our office. Sincerely, C. Hallinan, Public Inquiry Unit, for Kamala D. Harris, Attorney General. No follow-up. September 17th, 2018, Governor Jerry Brown, 1303 10th Street, Suite 1173, Sacramento, California, 95814. 916-558-3160. Dear Governor Brown, and I spoke to one of his handlers, and I read the first page of what I'll follow up with. September 27th, PIU 536675. Brian William Spellman. Dear Mr. Spellman, thank you for your correspondence dated September 17th, 2018. In your letter, you requested that the Attorney General's office investigate and potentially prosecute certain criminal allegations. With very few exceptions, the Criminal Division of the Attorney General's office litigates appellate matters, not trial matters. It falls to local law enforcement, the grand jury, and the county district attorney to investigate and potentially prosecute crimes that occur in their counties. Your documentation is thus being returned so you may seek assistance with your local entities. Thank you again in writing. Casey Hallinan, Public Inquiry Unit. Javier Becerra, Attorney General. They did not follow through. From YouTube, Thursday, October 11th, 2018. New reply. I've been trying to get in touch with you, Allison, for days. Allison Haley, Sheriff's Records Department, 707-253-4509. Sheriff John Robertson. Mentis, Mr. Spellman, thank you for your input. The case which you are referring in opinion has been thoroughly investigated. Holding a public dialogue about an uncharged homicide case in an open forum is an inappropriate misspell, as well as restricted by the California State Bar Rules for Professional Conduct. We have no record of you contacting the Napa County District Attorney's Office. Please contact me directly to discuss your concerns. I can be reached at 707-253-4211 or da@countyofnapa.org. Thank you. Michael Donovan, Chief Investigator, Napa County District Attorney's Office. I have left 2 voicemails, neither have been returned, and I've submitted all my information to Mike Donovan, Chief Investigator, 1127 1st Street, Suite C, Napa, California, 94115. Michael Donovan at countyofnapa.org, 707-253-4211. This is the horrific script I'm referring to. Interview of John Robertson, Detective Sergeant, Napa County Sheriff's Department, with Bryan Calvin Hartnell, NSO Case 105907 at Queen of the Valley Hospital on Sunday, September 28, 1969. Transcribed from tape recording by M. Feurle, F-E-U-R-L-E. And this is the worst script I have ever read in my life. It is nauseating. There is the perpetrator of the crime, Bryan Calvin Hartnell, Zodiac Killer, of Cecelia Ann Shepard. And I wrote on June 26th to Kamala Harris, this, to whom it should concern. My name is Bryan Spellman. I want to discuss with you a 1969 crime, the murder of Cecelia Ann Shepard. Exceeding 2 years from first concluding Bryan Calvin Hartnell was not victimized during the same attack, but rather murdered Cecelia Shepard, I want to persuade you now of the same. The paper that I have written and included with this letter refers to the M. Feurle transcription of Hartnell's interview with Sergeant Detective John Robertson, a day following the attack, when, according to both men speaking within the interview, Cecelia Shepard remained alive. Amidst initial hysteria of reading the transcription, I attempted to convince police local of me of my thinking on this overall topic. I made many mistakes and eventually failed to persuade them of anything beyond my upset. They graciously followed their own protocol and dispatched the matter, all the while failing to reverse or discourage my premise. Official word said thin. I have since thickened it while also constricting perspective. Last March, I submitted a second and better reasoned explanation to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, also more confined to the interview itself. Aware that the Bureau did not directly oversee initial investigation, I still sent my paperwork, however unconventional, with hopes that it might galvanize a reply. I understand approach towards profiling does not begin with discrediting an account of insincere literature to arrive at an accusation, but rather through crime scene analysis and then victim backstory. For fairness sakes to a suspect, I even appreciate why. Still, this third paperwork, more finely calibrated, cautiously offers a preferred approach to contain and contribute towards resolving this matter. Please set aside adequate time to read and then reply. Appreciatively yours, Bryan William Spellman, 20355 Sherman Way, number 328, Winnetka, California, 818-456-4289. There are copies of my letters. The interview is entitled, Why Tell Even One Lie? Why tell even one lie? Why would anyone intending to kill the only two others present at a remote location first find it necessary to lie about his identity as prison escapee, having murdered a guard and stolen a car? Why? To intimidate compliance? Counterproductive. According to story, this alleged attacker brandished a gun and knife and would better maintain situational control and minimize panic by either emptying the clip outright in furtherance of murder, or if instead a gun never present, to then change method of operation as later confirmed, applying a more impassionate instrument, also quiet, as well as more practical to remove suspicion from assailant of known victim Cecelia Shepard. The completed murder motive for now leaves an admittedly mysterious route, eventually requiring more detailed explanation. I continually revisit the premise, underscoring my hypothesis, and then build upon that. Why lie about anything? A third person already proposed from Bryan Hartnell attacked both Cecelia Shepard and himself. As some so often say, he should know he was there. To that I agree. He does know, but I resubmit to this alleged account of attack from Hartnell rather a ruse or phantom killer, meaning only 2 people, not 3 present, and accuse Hartnell of murdering Cecelia Shepard. At my revision point, his suspect remains a first reader's excuse buffer for now to offer any nonsense Hartnell attempted to explain. Although once satisfied that a single lie emerged from his account, one must reconsider survivor as perpetrator. To separate out information from distortion further, ask yourself, are we looking for a highly competent murderer or an imbecile? I claim highly competent, describing imbecile without actually naming as such, and getting very mixed up at times to both describe and also reluctant for how to simply name. We only have one account on record muddying up the description for him for what I shall now name in a few ways: dummy, imbecile, fool, klutz, moron, and far more dryly respecting Hartnell's craftiness as a ruse, imaginary, or phantom suspect. Hartnell disguised messaging throughout his interview, conflicting description and labeling or name, finally anchoring on the least descriptive ordinary attribute of his suspect: clothing, less added costume to assign a vaguest description: low class. For the insulting names that I have previously deployed, consider them all variations or synonyms to attribute his described suspect. The name that I do not insult but apply to Hartnell thus far described as costume and set designer. Yes, strategically in furtherance of murder. If other crimes ultimately do link him, more descriptive but not embellished names could apply. Admittedly from afar, I always seek to locate people, not caricatures of them. Asked to guess a motive late in the interview, Hartnell still proposed robbery. I ask, after everything alleged to have taken place by then? Obviously taken mostly from this interview transcript, I shall nevertheless utilize a profiler's term, that of consistent. Given the particulars of this absurd robbery scenario, does anything about it read consistent with intelligence? Did anything actually proposed by him ever get stolen? Hartnell even admits not keeping his 50 cents and later loose change from an armed suspect, but still maintain this utterly impractical robbery guess. It offers not a guess, rather a distortion technique to obscure motive from a personalized murder that he committed. I shall explain this later in more detail. Once understood, the most persuasively incriminating remark that he made, as I see it, also established fact. You know, I've read about the criminal mind and everything, you know. He educated from the past so as to anticipate how to best confuse the oncoming mind readers. I shall hope to satisfy that Hartnell prepared way out in front of any modest learning curve. He remains the same man, if you want to examine that interview dungeon at all. Would skepticism ultimately ask any honest person to begin reconsidering this or any other transcription of this interview from the vantage point of its original storyteller? Want more? Good. I shall apply ample doubt to my piece of evidence, the casually scrutinized interview from Sergeant Detective JOHN ROBERTSON towards Bryan Calvin Hartnell. Does anyone attempting murder at a remote location really need disguise to fulfill intentions? Phrased another way, might it draw attention prior to encounter? Leaving that ambiguity aside for now, but reapplying the ambiguity theme with variation, could the mask have made Hartnell excused from precise description following encounter to line up offerings like that, unlike the first two, and fourth shootings, if his would need to not claim a presence at all? A Assume from my limitations that the latter photograph Carmen Gia markings following Cecelia Shepard's murder do in fact link the previous two shooting murders. As for costume description, any Halloween get-up smoker could have served the same storyline pragmatism for stabbing to death Cecelia Shepard. As for religiously performing Hartnell, he detailed the Southern Cross symbol persistently and repeatedly without ever naming it, hoping Detective Robertson could invest in the story. Robertson could only participate in description, not understanding. Astrologers of the day took their intuitions to interpret stars seriously, measuring them meticulously. Astronomers now know the planet tilts at 23 degrees from the North Pole towards the Sun. Consequently, in a star called Bethlehem, for 3 days and nights, the Sun then and still rises and falls similarly following the Three Kings constellation in irregularity. On the third day, the Sun, or S-O-N, Sun, rose in fulfillment of Scripture. Other variants of the five-star Southern Cross come from peoples living south of the equator, where year-round it displays more readily. My source comes largely from the Zeitgeist documentary. For myself, neither biblical nor pagan scholar, but to me an acceptable explanation for the already religious skepticism. Regard my explanation for detailing as literally incorrect from your own perspective if preferred. The precise mythology matters little. Whether astrologer, astronomer, or from many still parts from both, in 1969 or now, what should remain abundantly clear to anybody reading this interview that such descriptive detailing of rarefied reference, abundantly clear to anybody reading this interview without ever naming, hides educational acumen. Thereafter, the emergent motif steered and distorted the story, whether by Hartnell himself or anybody else contributing to messaging, anonymous callers, others, etc., corresponding consistent with the Zodiac offender. Personally, I satisfy that good and bad scruples lie on both sides of faith and skepticism. I merely declare as no churchgoer's pushover. Do people understand that they do not have to lose their faith, just their faith in Hartnell? From either religious faith or skepticism like mine, read his witnessing throughout this interview. Does an exaggerated, ultimately false conscience reveal, especially when specified from religious heroism, or said another way, eventually also make you skeptical and angry as applies to this matter? I repeat, this remains not a religious story but a legal one, meanwhile bastardizing faith, media, suburbia, and city for the purpose of settling a personal score and then getting away with murder by further distorting and embellishing profile through messages. Do you think the fool described by Hartnell could ever pull all this off? The crux of Hartnell's personal dispute towards Cecelia Shepard currently eludes, but I know that he lied repeatedly throughout his interview. The totality of Hartnell's account fills substitution for actuality, only offering facts to convenience overall fabrication. For this moment, allow that Hartnell murdered Cecelia Shepard as conventionally or personally motivated homicide, scrawled misinformation onto his car to link unrelated crimes, and then later borrowed the Paul Stein shooting homicide seized as mere opportunity. Remember, given the limitations of my evidential piece and current perspective, albeit embedded with enormous accusation to the one murder, I must offer any criminal event linkages beyond reasonable doubt from peripheral and therefore also possible confirmed and unconfirmed reports. Always remember that only one lie from either testimony or physical evidence can expose and reseal the whole awful story. I must for now abstain from fully informed opinion and thus only offer strong intuition pertaining to the more unconscionable Zodiac composite of crimes, whether Cecelia Shepard died from Zodiac-inflicted knife wounds or not, whatever Zodiac eventually deems to encompass. Could you possibly think of a better prerequisite profile to architect such serial saga as from Hartnell? You know I'm in the sociologist's field. You know I'm pre-law with history and psych, mindful that apart this interview critique, each by themselves or collectively should command admiration. I want to pause at this point to address the power of semantic or word selection itself. The term serial, coined sometime following many events related to this matter, perhaps initially blueprinted from these outstanding crimes for linkage, but still describe, as far as I know, both police and public interpretation of information applied to predominantly random, stranger-to-stranger attacks with cooling-off intervals. Once the serial rhetoric did later establish and reinforce this perspective, as a model offers at best imprecise compared to my explanation, and if named attacks and media distortion do link, wrong as initiating motive and model quite possibly regarding the whole story. It was a John Douglas coinage. Aside personalized hatred is applied to one murder of Cecelia Shepard, specifics a mystery, I do not claim to confirm details, but maintain my confidence from limitation to personalized hatred because I maintain confidence that Hartnell lied throughout his interview. An innocent victim would not need to lie even once. For the most important or primary question, ask not why murder, but why lie about murder. Find just one specific lie that connects him to satisfy to overall fabrication. You want to know something? Suspicions and doubts from backstory would have become direct accusations from time geographic alibi without a mark on Hartnell, but he defeated those suspicions with just enough denial to render those people a word. Confused. A fact. Once police and media connected the Paul Stein homicide to the composite, the skeptics from backstory cringed with remorse, and Hartnell emerged even further from accusation. Reconstruct, and I promise that some will come, hopefully precluding trial. Crafty and crony interference runners could make them look worse than him even without raising their temper, simply by asking, why did you wait so long? As for homicide investigation, I familiarize with crime scene and victim backstory, usually presuming primary motive from first murder scene. Initiating motive obscured even further from sequencing. As Hartnell passed so readily to victim status, I must also suspect FBI pros eagerly spoke to him already, perhaps not due to homicide, but messaging terrorism. I offer sensitivity to whomever. One lie. Hartnell's interview overall offers lie overall, therefore piecemeal lies as well. Again, does Hartnell's aforementioned prerequisite profile establish alone anything incriminatory? Not by itself at all, only consistent if corrupted criminally to suit purpose, but all features utterly inconsistent with Hartnell's stereotypical simpleton, fool, heck no type suspect. Do you suppose Hartnell drawled, accented, talked, or even sung to mimic his suspect? Hartnell stated, I guess it's his way of talking, therefore simply implying by his way, meaning throughout. Hartnell continued with, it's like a song. Sometimes you know what you're going to say, but you can't sing the melody worth a dime. You know that I would like him to sing it. Hartnell's suspect in some way sung lengthily to the two before stabbing them. Once again, I determine these matters looking to locate people, not caricatures of them. If any singing took place, it rehearsed subsequent to attack and prior to interview, and then strategically discarded from Hartnell. Probably can't sing the melody worth a dime. If Hartnell verifies as clinically tone deaf in another manner from just reading and writing typeset, I tune with precision. Plenty of it. If later Paul Stein assailant, would you expect a costumed Hartnell running the streets of the Presidio to escape or commit without having committed a gun homicide? Mind you, I do not know if ballistics or just what evidence connected any of the shooting. I mention the Paul Stein homicide only from my limitation of profile perspective in furtherance of disingenuous interviewing with Robertson, nevertheless consistent with moving attentions away from both geography and victim selection from a personalized murder, at the very least profile distorted convenience if not committed offense. But what the hell do you think? Hartnell simply noticed two frenetic gun homicides and conveniently interjected his personal score and then later messaged in for credit to an unrelated shooting. But what, if not already apparent, I have waited for the beginning to announce my own hand, a surfer, happenstance amateur upon a very bogusly told story from Hartnell and then accepted by many others. I have no doubt that collectively late to arrive amateurs irritate professionals, sometimes juries, beyond anybody's business. I only hope that so far I have not. I offer expansion beyond interview and admit loose familiarity with overall events, as surely many do. Assuredly others more familiar with data and educated to this matter than me. I suppose as example, but without specificity, I also broadly understand logistical legal difficulties inherent to interconnect this whole story, even within an alternative confinement to Cecelia Shepard's murder, and moreover, reinvesting anything from temporary discretion towards an identified suspect, especially one resourceful as Hartnell. I shall absolve any presumptions of investigative experience and only mention my understanding that conventional approach to homicide addresses crime scenes, gore, coupled with victim backstories, from which to develop a loose but likely portfolio of a suspect, and occasionally suspects. Not privy to either information, I instead enter unconventional, disputing sincerity outright towards the literature. If they cannot provide an irrefutable, disqualifying beyond any challenge puzzle piece to the Cecelia Shepard murder of Bryan Hartnell, then for now consider my limitation as temporary advantage from which to pursue a line of reason. Not to appear smug, but what has conventional approach thus far produced? The FBI, assuredly other law enforcement arms, have profiles somewhere, ones that I have never seen, if you like and figure possible, with and or even without Hartnell, treat my writing as a control group, the typewritten thoughts of a double-blind, solitary citizen, and then see if we describe a similar villain. Understand that I may not succeed with my hypothesis, however detailed or succinct and well-intentioned, fully digestible to any seated group of all 12 by myself. As a formal deposition, I concern this writing has already become complex, yet as topically legal, therefore momentarily presuming before a 12, I would only hope for them not intimidation or confusion, but then just believe me enough. As composed thus far, I addressed to professional profiles, moreover to ones within that profession better specialized to separating out a very close read of evidence, but not simply concluding intermittent confusion, but specific and then overall lying. In ordinary jargon, I pick a very big fight. But even for prose, you only need one lie. Consider Detective Robertson's perspective. From the interview's outset, do you suppose it plausible that he received briefing in some way beforehand? Something affecting, go easy, he's been through a lot. Would anyone prefer to believe so? Upon reading his disposition throughout largely indicates so, such upon casual and first pass with some seemingly minor oversight. In maintaining fairness at points, Robertson asks qualifying questions but accepts imprecision, contradiction, ambiguity, and vagary, back and forth, out of sequence to events, even as alleged. At others, he asks 2- and 3-part or package questions with alarmingly different possibilities, but accepted one answer rather than separating questions and moving forward to await 2 or 3 answers. I shall note an example later. If you accept my proposal, then it follows as modeled to Detective Robertson, collaboration within hospital, also an established fact, but to Hartnell, thinly veiled encounter, courtroom, one he must win. Let me explain. Might one say that as procedure, attorneys borrow witnesses to contribute to their perspective as means of persuasion, whether true or false? If victims, no such caginess or force of habit nonsense explains Hartnell's relentlessness by any reasonable standard. Nevertheless, borrowing to invest or contribute as technique applied pressure throughout this account, as if from a formal defense attorney. Each time Hartnell succeeded in getting Robertson to fill storyline, He also undermined the detective's beginning, premature, and shaky resolve for administering doubt to alternative. Whether the persistent gun ammo byplay, the ongoing exchanges related to costume, especially the Southern Cross insignia, the Montana Lodge prison lie, Hartnell baited Robertson with fern and feathers, then closer with double name, Fernlock, to which Robertson bit, Lodge, to which Hartnell replied, well, I shall bait you myself and go back to read it. Hartnell, with Robertson's contributions, persuaded the detective and others to these fabrications. Admitting Hartnell smart, this at times offers a clumsy story, as if making some up as he went along. In concert with anticipating questions and guilty, he would also have to ad-lib. If innocent, his account would recollect and read clean, unless so obliterated by sedation or from dire legal judgment to intercede his imminent death. Yet Hartnell claimed to have spoken repeatedly to associates already. Otherwise, this interview would have waited. Responsive to Robertson's, how do you feel? Am I tiring you out much? Hartnell stated, no, I've had a couple of shots. It's not hurting me at all. Do not accept either impairment to Hartnell's lucidity or any pretense from ignorance. Robertson's expressly stated what you did was a courageous thing. Nothing could further miss the truth. Hartnell knew the Montana Lodge, just failed to research its history. Follow up with your own resources to confirm or deny any such crime precise to timeline. I shall accept yours as more credible than mine. I Google researched the prison, it having a website, and reported a riot in 1959, mentioning nothing noteworthy a decade later. Back then, though, Hartnell could never have anticipated the internet and how publicly exposed his attempting a fall guy could eventually become. I understand that my internet research into this saga has also likely galvanized others similarly. Whatever or whomever Hartnell's fugitive story most closely matched, the connection fell apart and a viable suspect with it. This suspect, for no practical and advantage reason, told an outright lie. No need to intimidate picnickers with a tough guy story holding a gun and a knife. I began my account here with that lie because 2 years ago it reinforced my already innumerable doubts. After that, if you as reader become more partial to my idea, restart as well to sift through doubts, one at a time to his suspect, and eventually replace that with the ruse or imaginary suspect, and then, like me, you will also describe a liar, albeit confused as to how best to do so under pressure, and by deduction, a murderer. If scrutinizing me to remember actual details, I have this interview account from him with which to piece by piece reconstruct a more plausible set of explanations, given disbelief. At worst, I mistake the detail, never sincerity. The jurors excuse themselves with, how should I know? I wasn't there. I try my very best to patiently bring you there. Hartnell's most effective lying moment within the whole interview, yeah, in response to Robertson's two-part softball question. Did you lose consciousness when he stabbed you at any time? Did you observe him stab Cecelia? Now go back and read for yourselves the dialogue and figure out that Hartnell committed to having said nothing substantive. In legalese, on the stand, keep your answers short. No wonder. Make the attorneys earn it. The first statement Hartnell claimed to address his gun and knife-toting, masked, paper sack, or hooded suspect, Robertson, or again Hartnell, little mask, thereafter conveniently interchangeable despite contradictions with, well listen, Mac. Oh really? Even upon conceding awkwardness, would you provoke someone like that and then lecture him and then engage a lengthy therapy session as well as excessive gun ammunition talk? Talk of this topic with a potential assailant. Stop there. Now consider the appearance of whom Hartnell eventually and contradictorily described and how long it took him to first mention it. He even spoke into this phony costume by describing a low-class assailant by what to me read as an otherwise ordinary clothing. If you told this story, would you first upon seeing such an utterly bizarre perpetrator describe threatening appearance before lengthy conversation and extensive behavior preceding attack? There appeared no such figure. Hartnell first eventually offered mask, then paper sack, right after describing combed, dark brown hair. Robertson eventually later first mentioned hood, and then in furtherance of Hartnell's earlier front panel and back, over the shoulders, asked about in the middle of his chest. Later on, Hartnell blundered even further after mentioning little mask, claiming down to his stomach. Robertson even asked the right question: how could you see his hair? He accepted Hartnell's vague goggles fit, earlier described as clip-ons as well as flittered, implying an open seam to a sack or hood, yet eyewear, inside or outside, the suit, Hartnell, little mask, again Hartnell, paper sack, again Hartnell, or hood, Robertson. Step aside these wildly contradictory minutiae and ask yourself my question. If open seamed and exposing hair, would it not fall off? Hartnell detailed an aggressive encounter. If, unlike me, you attribute these inconsistencies to his trauma, following the interview, an artist's sketch eventually rendered. Only Hartnell could have explained and given his okay to it. I still recollect not a little mask or mask, but a kind of cumbersome hood, seamed and without seam, doubtful to this struggle. Do you consider my side and doubt his nonsense statement as well? Hartnell likely failed to design and build a prototype, explaining why his story fell apart so badly for me. On the other hand, he could have built a number of prototypes and contradicted himself by rehearsing it so many times. Backtracking, the first mention of either stealing or homicide presumed from Hartnell, not his suspect. He then mentioned calling your bluff and, well, just don't start playing hero on me. As amongst professional profiles and confirmed former resident experts, John Douglas, Roy Hazelwood, Colonel Robert Ressler, or another I admire, Greg McCreary, that only for the moment accepting my skepticism, Hartnell also read throughout as a term that I've heard all describe, grandiose. Extend the same attribute throughout relevant to religiosity. If for the moment accepting Hartnell, did he embellish his role of behavior and self-imaging? He conditioned himself through byplay, and with his fictitious suspect, never heard others to fool him into actually believing the upcoming heroics. Well, just don't start playing hero on me. He did not even make it through this disingenuous interview, maintaining false humility. Hartnell remains one salty SOB, but nevertheless grinded his way through this failed attempt at a consistent set of lies. Eventually asked reasonable people the same. To me, this interview account reads as perpetrator psychoanalyzing a fraud in front of the sergeant detective. I use psychoanalyzing in its most public and generic sense. If doubting me, you could rightly charge this author, Spellman, merely converses the account back and forth with himself. From my vantage, better recognition of the characteristics Hartnell ascribed to his suspect before Robertson. Don't try to grab the gun, because I didn't really figure the gun was loaded. Nor do I, except that it was loaded with a lot of bullshit, meaning not present at all, and would tip off even his rendition of Cecelia Shepard's role. Hartnell ambushed her with a knife after hog-tying her, and eventually wrong for the other incriminating reasons, namely the linked alibi, measuring comparative wounds with greater difficulty, ridding a gun from the crime scene, as well drawing attention to noise rather than seeking help from offering a timeline flexibility. Regarding later and ongoing religiosity, if skeptical like me, Hartnell reads as maudlin, melodramatic, more about him than her, and actually consistent with Hazelwood's angry term, narcissist. If agreed only for consistency, also serialist. I have never read the Greek mythology, but understand its common application to falsely self-important to a point of exceedingly selfish and presume Hazelwood's term of the same applied general profiling the same. Believe me, despite everything involved with this, Hartnell's goal was not suffering the stranger victims, but how to minimize it for anybody required to get his primary purpose of murdering Cecelia Shepard done. Nothing from anyone as shooting victims connected the other 3 gun homicides contradict that intention. That alone makes retreat easier. Further spiraling into extended violence also exchanges with less likely to stop and then get away. As for tying up, did Cecelia Shepard's overall wounds indicate more consistent with inflictions upon someone not tied up at all, just attacked? For Hartnell, he claimed having said 2 or 3 times to his suspect, "We could be here all night. We could freeze to death." Oh, really? Given his alleged gravity of threat by that point, does it also sound his priority ludicrous? It makes no sense within this bogus account. However, the same remark reveals most relevant as Hartnell reflected upon Cecelia Shepard's and his own coagulation rates, also needing approximation. If you accept my interpretation, during this interview, Hartnell would have also have his story stressed from uncertainty concerning Cecelia Shepard's eventual fate. Relating to Hartnell's wounds, 6 all in the back. The doctor says there's 6 in the back. 6 wounds on my back. You ought to confirm that. But why offer that to the detective? That reads as a flag too. Overly solicitous from guilty conscience to disengage Robertson from follow-up. Yes, here though I agree with Hartnell. I have no access to reports from either's hospital staff. I do not know whether the same doctors attended both patients or made comparisons at all to the wound disparities. Somewhere within hospital records there also remains a coroner's report for one. With disappointment, I believe that coroners elect from the public, thus not assigned and promoted through scientific peer review. You know that I think Hartnell self-inflicted his, whatever the actual severity, because I have doubted his interview account all along. This attack premeditated by measurement. Do not go beyond hog wild, because self-inflictions will need to come closer. The groin stabbing injury likely represented a fidelity issue or issues, but not sexual perversion. None of the affiliated crime scenes feature lasciviousness. Unfamiliar to later messaging specifics, I do recollect that gluttonous bluffs took place, all leading attentions away an aspiring lawyer. With neither a quick kill injury nor water source to bleed out Cecelia Shepard, Hartnell probably discovered amid surprise how long it takes a person to expire from a controlled stabbing. On another note, FBI linguistics experts, run the note by them. Run M. Feurle's Robertson-Hartnell interview and then my assessment of that transcript by them. Somewhere it remains audible, if not video available on tape. If this M. Feurle transcription approximates the tape, it would scream out loud to me from only one person, Cecelia Shepard. She received a measured, bled-out torture, not an indifferent gunshot, and Hartnell doubtless used plenty of profane language or obscenity, wanting Cecelia Shepard to know exactly what for and how infuriated he was with her. Hartnell described his suspect as 5'8" or maybe 5'10", 6 feet, somewhere in there. Once more, victim vague, yet differentiated, I gather from him. I do not know from where, but recall the real living witness and witness describing assailant within this range. Given the frenetic commotion, a miscalculation? Whether the perpetrator to the first 2 shootings proves Hartnell or not, he would almost certainly have retained familiarity with the description, at the very least matching it close enough to his suspect within the interview, or once again to my ruse explanation. If correct, the startled victim and survivor provided an unbeknownst gift to Hartnell. It's Merlot. I find many lines of contradiction within this interview, so I shall pause here to generalize. Hartnell's account read so all over the place during the torture, described as a rescue boat. He refreshed his glasses as off to defend lying throughout this preposterous fabrication of time, space, and possibility. Nevertheless, one lie confirmed by physical evidence could forego a trial, perhaps even force a confession. An honest declaration of guilt would reveal more than I or anyone else could. Of current importance, once becoming an at-large murderer, always retains potential to murder again for anybody new connecting with him about what really happened. Upon surprise, one could actually infer impulsively. I know of none. When I reached the "before I kissed her" remark, I had already begun an earlier attempt to read before getting really sick. My panic germinated and overwhelmed from isolation coupled with magnitude, presuming only one other living person understood. Immediately after the kissing remark, Hartnell again completely contradicted himself with "we started yelling." Did the rescue boat scenario ever confirm a pair of reliable witnesses, or just convenience a timeline to bleed out, not relax out? Cecelia Shepard. Hartnell only presumed the boaters' reluctance to help, even presumed absurdity for now how they might get attacked. The guy might be there in the bushes and they were liable to get choked or something. If the imaginary boaters became assailed by the imaginary perpetrator, it would have come from a real knife, or unlike me still hanging on with Hartnell's gun fiction, that. What would leave alternative? Someone confirmed by Hartnell as having maintained control of both instruments throughout an entire attack, who then ran off behind bushes to hide both of them, just in case witnesses came ashore in the aftermath to help, fearful that they might get choked? That recites conscience, not wanting to take responsibility for either weapon. I've changed my mind for a third time as for what to call them, whether present or convenient to fabrication. Tools. Did any boaters report this incident as alleged to detail? No, they did not. Frightened or not, do you also know that they would later have to, and to specify and confirm with precision his account of this? Can you really escape yourselves from his bullshit story? He has confirmed the notion that witnesses watched and heard the crime scene up close, 100 yards, not implied in progress, but removed any doubt from even that crappy 15-minute timeline watching Crisis, the most mean-spirited imaginaries Hartnell assigned to his own false witnesses, terrified for taking responsibility for himself. As any motor the boaters described never existed, so of course neither did the motor. Picking amongst any of his perspectives, even finally he came a little closer, and of course they went away. He almost did too. What do you think the primary purpose of his rescue boat tale during confusion within that interview? Ambivalently phrased, Hartnell contemplated suicide at that crime scene. He eventually risked this suicide against intention to self-inflicted injuries. Yet he unexpectedly left himself a bind within this rescue fantasy, describing something similar to old-school Coliseum sadist spectators watching 15 minutes of bleed, not relax. He should ask to bury face down for that. He also did not have a gun available. Sometimes I consider motoring myself away from this awful interview. As regards saving faith, Hartnell either lost or never had it, but most assuredly before all this. I figured out so that when he stated, "But if you believe in the principles, you ask God to help you." That meant present tense also. He did not have faith. He just wanted to list something he did not even believe in, therefore did not even begin to play fair within faith-based rules. Unfortunately, that wish list possibly developed endurance to begin and carry out his entire plan. To me, a Hartnell euphemism. If the thing was going to happen, consider that back and forth remarks for how much help he thought he did and did not deserve from a deity that he did not believe in. Compartmentalized, that does baffle me how anyone could tie their own shoelaces, leaving alone anything he has gone onto. Worship attendee or not, Hartnell does not practice faith from honesty, but pretense. I recall the entrance of a convenience suspect who never really fit this puzzle. How eventually, forensically, or ever real profile Arthur Lee Allen. Had I seen this interview, I would have placed every 50 cents that I could have possibly stolen against even a 0 in a trillion DNA match, and I know who else would have against any inflation rates except his own bullshit. As for First Notified, Hartnell foresaw any unnecessary problem a real person as suspect posed, but would have never asked how he looked but how sounded. Given his conflicting and non-committal voice descriptions, he would only need to claim uncertainty, but never confidence and no personal conviction. From Hartnell's perspective, if ongoing suspects had not been disqualified, let others chase them. Please discard Arthur Lee Allen, as well as all later photo ops, well-intentioned or not. The detective asked, "Now is he as heavy as I am?" Hartnell engaged Robertson's offer by eagerly comparing the two, cajoling distinction by professional looking. Hartnell confused even more by returning to his sloppily dressed, low-class association, this time, however, also flattering Robertson. Again, the drawl or accent. Hartnell offered as non-committal, though more contradictions, hence evasiveness. Unlike his face, he claimed to have spoken to his suspect and therefore did not want precision here or for that matter anywhere else. As for illiterate, the same room from which to later evade, equivocate, redirect, or better said, bullshit. Again, he faked just greatest confidence as to low class by clothing. Given physical description, did that leave just cotton coat with a turned up collar to match the little mask, or his stomach length front panel, and also agreed as windbreaker? Would not stomach length also cover zipper down the front and definitely a turned up collar? Or artist hood, pleated pants, or a pair of nondescript footwear? Reverting back, Hartnell committed to describing greasy, flittered, combed, brown hair, largely or completely concealed within a costume. Do you read me under this little mask, paper sack, suit, or hood? Come on, did he see him or did he not? He tells description is confused because throughout Hartnell attempted to describe ambiguities to foil traceability, yet cannot square this while also trying to remember his lies. The hardest thing in the world to do for a guilty person. Unlike any ordinary people, would apply an actual victimization or similar attack. What leaves him the easiest thing to do, to remember if deemed honest, following this encounter? What else for him? The truth, and vivid. I do not confuse upon reading Hartnell's interview, both official and his first. Do you continue to deny me? She was more weak at the time, from the religious angle. This reads as religious hypocrisy veiling the worst in selfishness, bravado against smear. I told her I sure as heck wasn't going to have any deathbed conversion, unquote. So far I agree. It only indicates that he thought about it and will possibly think about it at times. If you want a clearer story, Bryan Hartnell can surely tell it, but not by re-examining everything in this contrived interview. From the moment and admittedly presuming way ahead, as now a polished agent of the court and no longer a 1969 amateur upstart, do not attempt Hartnell to ever directly defend himself nor take the stand in actual court. Despite initial attention, his elusiveness makes me speculate unlikelihood as souvenir keeper or a potential scribe of posthumously released memoirs. You know I think he should prosecute himself and confess the real story instead. I have very limited familiarity peripheral to his success. Given my doubt is expressed only confirms consistency to how formidable an adversary he has passed as in continuing to fleece new enthusiasts. If you believe me, then he has gone over and at least thought about this interview, possibly more than I have, but only initially. However, to utilize another profile as term to compartmentalize his conscience described throughout the interview so fastidiously, while never actually just naming fired rounds or clips from his own hand at the other gun crime scenes. To compartmentalize, he would need to prioritize shrewdness over arrogance to ever retain and hide any mementos. If he did, probably destroyed or buried them. If revisited and eventually pressured to explain this interview, his likely first impulse is to redesign, add, modify, or subtract, then stuck to accept face value this unbelievably phony account. All his mistakes aside, Hartnell passes any timeline standard for clever. His own suspect first caught him, for me, a disingenuous caricature feigning high education coupled with low intelligence, conversing at the crime scene a gullibility, scarce of realistic situational qualities and behaviors to carry out an elementary scale armed robbery or even murder. Hartnell's low versus high class distinction connected back to nothing substantively explained, indicating more evasiveness. Again, throughout, Hartnell described both gun and ammunition of his suspect, as well as the conversation he had with the alleged stabber concerning these. I've never owned a gun or heard live rounds or clips fired. Still, I've never read more details about both to his alleged suspect through shared dialogue without committing to simply name the firearm. Do you honestly think a real suspect would compare extensive notes with his victim before stabbing one to death after reflection? Do you think that such a klutz could carry off, then escape this crime, let alone others, including the elaborate media correspondence? Hartnell wanted to borrow Detective Robertson for filling in the gun misinformation, to participate in fabrication and pass Hartnell through this mostly passive interview. But now he has. If the guns obviously present were registered, did Hartnell's history of gun ownership ever come under scrutiny? Of course not. He passed the interview. If the guns were not registered, could a connection where hot be uncovered? Either way, by convincing gun at the crime scene, he also removed himself from suspicion to all other shootings by reinforcing the notion of stranger-to-stranger attacks, likely true at the other crime scenes. Again, his story only satisfies if you buy into his false suspect. If preferring my ruse or phantom suspect hypothesis, with all its current limitations, does it run consistent with why Hartnell so persistently detailed and sold his gun idea, unconfirmed by physical evidence, only offered by his testimony? Has he ever undergone challenge for any physical evidence, handwriting, stamp, or envelope saliva, ciphers, careful, fingerprint, handprints, or anything that would pin him to one specific lie? He has formally received classification as victim to suspect. No, again, Hartnell has never reclassified as person of interest or more emphatically suspect, only victim. For any stranger suspect to emerge, much physical evidence allows wiggle room, like I interfered, or I was playing a prank, or was trying to help. As for that one, do not worry. Cecelia Shepard died when I lived as a 9-year-old in Massachusetts. I suppose that murder having no statute of limitations, whether officially open or closed, I can chance any presumptions as meddler, risking civil action from Hartnell. If you agree with my doubt, then Hartnell remains the only all-or-nothing man as suspect. By that I mean, for the commitment he has made, present at the scene of a homicide, detailed a lengthy encounter with a suspect, citing rescue boat witnesses to the carnage. For Hartnell, even so much as connecting one piece of physical evidence becomes overwhelmingly incriminating. Whether searching lies or preferring the condensed story thus far, seek an overall collection of internal lies within his interview. If attempting comprehensive, connect other stuff, much to which I remain unfamiliar. Please take my advice. Do not bother looking for the costume. It either never existed or was discarded after the attack of Cecelia Ann Shepard. Even if some evidence or alleged evidence proves not directly incriminating to him, such remains possible as attributed to a collaborator or nuisance. Economy equals prudence. Given the deluge by now, do many offerings fulfill falsehood as certainty? Hartnell's phony costume description has probably made cynical showcasing at San Francisco Halloween door-to-doors by now. Returning to the interview, I don't remember if they, an acceptable miscue, had gloves on or not. I can't remember how, now. I keep thinking he had gloves on. I can't figure how he tied us. By Hartnell's allegation, he figured out how to untie himself. Let's ask Cecelia. She probably knows about that. We cannot, and he had to risk presuming that. He did not confuse from sedation, but story. Consider the closeness and length of the alleged encounter from talk, tie-down, and plundering, from both sight and touch. Now likely reads that Hartnell would not remember gloves. It only meant that he recognized the knife remained retrievable from scouring that crime scene. Mistake upon mention. Nevertheless, his problem solved. The rest of his description fills a lot of details that would have committed the account to considerable time. In furtherance of stabbing and believing me, Hartnell could not administer overkill to Cecelia Shepard because to fulfill his plan he would also have to bring his own wounds comparatively close. Consistent with my charge, the wounds as approximated, described, applied both right and to complete murdering Cecelia Shepard, the strategy would instead have necessitated substantial time, especially if injuries bypassed her vital points to ensure Hartnell's survival. In other words, Hartnell would have to ambush, disable without cutting Cecelia Shepard's throat or stabbing her heart, and then hold her down to bleed. Again, he used relax out. Without a gun, he would eventually inflict his own wounds. If Cecelia Shepard faked dead or recuperated momentarily, Hartnell would have to need that knife. Hence, without a gun, he initially failed to toss the knife deep into Lake Berryessa. For innumerable practical and obvious reasons, along with my already stated ones, a gun would have remained similarly prohibitive. What could Hartnell do? Fire bullets into his own body at point-blank range? The then claimed to Robertson while tied face down, his assailant failed to shoot him in the head? That leaves no reason to believe a murder motive without completion or robbery motive without anything stolen. Nevertheless, why undergo such a drastic stabbing strategy? Well, Hartnell decided to account for the meeting rather than ambush Cecelia Shepard and then flee that scene, moreover pairing the two as victims rather than drawing suspicion from any other inmates or intimates or either. Once deciding that Hartnell lied throughout his interview, the linked alibi, albeit severe, becomes the only alternative explanation. Again, despite all my confidence to doubt his flagrantly disingenuous account, a more developed backstory to other intimates, whomever now remains, should at least establish itself. Starting to find Hartnell's and Cecelia Shepard's closest friends when relations broke off are cool. There must have been a time where the two were actually very close, but not as illegitimately described here. Within the puzzle piece for this crime, I have discovered a more conventional, as yet undetailed initiating motive, however elaborate and unconventional the tactical procedures. From my unwavering doubt, I offer strategic motives to explain this murder, and as contingency only imply, if necessary, any others. Still, from limitation, I must offer strong impression to explain a reality. One man described, while I now attempt to unravel. The premium upon me does tax imagination because I describe and attempt to remove an imaginary suspect and replace that with a real one. Care as I do, I largely explain the activities of strangers. What offers my personal consistency to a piece of this new approach? The matter simply remains too important to ignore. I have deliberately refrained from furthering my education to the overall Zodiac story because I do not want to hold accountable for the extensive misinformation deluge. I believe that certifying a database authority can actually impede one's ability to more carefully discern critical aspects of the investigation. Obviously, I also believe myself to evaluate these release points of greatest storyline vulnerability, hence confining to interview. Still, questions remain for others to follow. Who first picked up the bloodied Hartnell? Did this guy also claim to see Cecelia Shepard? That was the ambulance with that phony baloney officer ambulance driver Collins. Despite two contradictory last departures from Hartnell's alleged perpetrator, read from my paperwork, one simultaneously running away from Phantom, the other composed and talking away following the ruse exit, only Hartnell's claimed arriving and then leaving with a roadside rescuer. What medium, where, how far away, and exactly how did police receive notice of the attack? How long did both police and ambulatory response take? I've already read Hartnell's rescue timeline for this guy, but nothing in between for how they, not this guy, therefore police, finally called an ambulance. Still, Hartnell claimed from when? About 15 minutes later it came. What questions addressed to the roadside rescuer? Giving my seemingly singular doubts and limited accusation thus far confined towards Hartnell, I also doubt any questions applied skepticism towards anyone, especially Hartnell, involved with the rescue during or later as follow-up, again mindful that for now I only maintain confident accusation towards Hartnell for murdering Cecelia Shepard. In his last mention from departing from this alleged assailant, Hartnell stated, and I guess he just took off running after we started running. I don't know. I never saw him before, nor allegedly ever saw, and hope to never see him again, or at least outside of a courtroom. Quote. According to his last rendition, Hartnell's alleged assailant, without a mark on him, ran away from Cecelia Shepard and Hartnell after her fainting and then not, with double-digit, eventually fatal plunder wounds, one in the groin, and then along with Hartnell finished her escape by running? Running? Earlier in the same transcript he described her first last parting from his assailant as, I think he kind of thought that. Of course I don't know because we started talking right after he left. It's hard to say, unintelligible. I don't think she fainted either. Either? Let me help you, reader. He meant after all. And moreover, of course not. From this rendition he had of Cecelia Shepard emerged from his stabbings after conversing with him. Nevertheless, he committed this fool's rendition for having time to talk after his alleged perpetrator left. Therefore, when did those glaring and graphic markings find their way onto his car? They were made after the attack. The markings deliberately contradicted Hartnell's absurd robbery motive because he needed to remove suspicion from his car handwriting, which pointed to the Zodiac suspect with a real murder motive. No matter how seemingly nonsensical the robbery motive, that explains why he continued pretending it to Robertson. Robertson would dismiss as motive and lessen as issue following the interview connecting other crime scenes. Who then secondarily took notice of the Carmen Gia markings? Hartnell stated that his alleged assailant left before help arrived. So what did and does he expect us to believe after his described assailant returned to mark the car after the attack, after he left before police arrived? If after, according to both or either parting account, plunder emergent, running and or talking Cecelia Shepard remained behind to witness Hartnell's costume suspect make his markings. Of course she could not. Hartnell's suspect never appeared in the first place with Cecelia Shepard, whom without any transcribed spoken remarks of her own remained limp. I believe that a figure from legal authority claims Cecelia Shepard's corroborated parts of Hartnell's bullshit account. That was Collins. Bullshit. Proceed with caution even today if encountering anyone speaking from that perspective. Varying accounts cite her death after different account timelines after discovery. I've read from between 7 hours to 2 days. Who would not infuriate upon recognizing all the convenience levels attributed to her alertness while contradicting alleged facts and hiding real ones. Hartnell murdered Cecelia Shepard and then reportedly insulted her lucidity by describing her as his storyline puppet. The most disorganized approach within this whole mismanaged interview account allowed not from Hartnell but Robertson, yielding and contributing from himself to speak about events, even as alleged, out of sequence, despite outrageously conflicting bullshit by Hartnell. I had to check repeatedly for my own page order, finally committing with a staple. As for Hartnell, his most earnest confession would necessitate a scrapping of this or any other transcribed interview and starting anew. He may have already bullshit some by claiming not to remember anything from this interview. Consistent with compartmentalizing his own conscience as functionary, Hartnell would eventually have tried and for now succeeded like hell to do just that. Forget about it. Upon whomever's ongoing blind and actual casual read of Hartnell's interview, I wonder how he could have still fooled from any subsequently comprehensive blackout lie. Does anyone fool themselves from Hartnell's aforementioned convenience of earlier, quote, everything blacked out on me, my visual. My mind was never blacked out, but my visual was. So I lay down. My eyes started to open, unquote. No matter how visual no wonder how his visual blacked out. He admitted right there opening his eyes. Given that he also admitted never losing consciousness, does it require much to figure out that he closed his eyes first? He may have well rehearsed blinking to rationalize flimsy support for anticipating his formal and spoken lie, eventually to Robertson. From now, any transcribed rendition of this enormously exposed interview remains the tool. Dare anyone charge me from taking anything within this interview out of context? Out of context, beginning to end, Hartnell's whole insincerity, admittedly skewed with ambivalence from guilt, read and sputtered out before any reasonable context, any reasonable truth, and any reasonable doubt. I do recall reading somewhere from a distant and anonymous telephone call, Tip This Man, and perhaps another within the composite first four scenes. Anonymous sources never make binding commitments. If in any way such a contribution occurred, stink it aside until Hartnell commits to explain himself and or collaborate. A greater risk from conspirators exists from their possibility to shield Hartnell from physical evidence. Do any of you still believe simply confusion, not flagrant lying, even within any transcription, is evasive juxtaposition? For goodness sakes, even with this M. Feurle transcription, who must have typed it up with a division of labor, factory, and overthinking to us, Hartnell could not possibly have mumbled any or all of this to mindless rote, or over to others from typeset. He contradicted in nearly a cartoonish of ways appearance, sound, and behavior of his ruse suspect. He recoiled his own conscience from murdering Cecelia Shepard more than he could have ever anticipated despite lying through his account of the attack, hence through so much ambivalence and motive, a truth concealed amid so much dishonesty from released rage. Once more, Hartnell's suggested motive concurring from Robertson's asking, money, describing a low loser imbecile dressed in a pagan, intellectual, Southern Cross Zodiac suit. He then asked Detective Robertson, are you nervous? I say, what for? If I may, are you nervous too? No, I'm just curious, says Robertson. Obviously, at this more composed hindsight combing over, I root for something else, long overdue. Without specificity to this or any other similar case, I shall share a personally, though uncorroborated, variation to the has no conscience motive often attributed to stealthy, violent offenders. I always consider them instead possessing highly adaptable conscience. For differing reasons, it applies in each case, and ever more dangerous to consider upon acceptance. Borrowing from a profiler's parlance, ability to compartmentalize both conscience and applied behavior, however divergent. As to criminal profile, innate or environmental, I I never like an A, right or wrong. It doubles as excuse and reaches far, specifying brain to thoughts and behavior, conceding myself without certification for any of this. I only familiarize by surfing in such arguments and interpret to compare and contrast them with what I know and try to hold accountable for myself. I digress slightly, offering this adaptable alternative to motive consistency with contradictory behaviors, opposed to the static across the board, has no conscience at all motive, often proposed easier to distance from by broadly homogenizing perpetrators, mostly after discovery. To find each, however, this perspective also yields imprecise. No conscience offers an easy all-out zombie model. I never ask why insane, mentally ill, or even immoral, but why and how upset and how much to apply such ruthlessness. Once any exit strategy attempts to, even more so, temporarily succeeds, insanity or even stupidity makes little or no sense. As applies to why so upset here, I defer others to explain. I extend from simply not believing Hartnell. Have you gotten any clues at all? Hartnell asks. I believe I have offered many. Contradictions for ambiguity and evasiveness hallmark a relentless liar as approaching his statement overall, and also note consistent with mixed media messaging concerning the overall case. The interview tells, as does the media scramble. Only intelligence remains, despite mistakes made under pressure throughout the interview. Hartnell's suspect features no perceptible smarts. Remember that he was headed for Mexico, unquote. Hartnell has not arrived there yet. Lastly, Hartnell wanted to know if they put his name in the paper. More pretext for moving on to his next girlfriend. Opposite Mexico, Portland. I think that they most certainly should in revised context. Once again, off interview and wary of ongoing journalism and other information vehicles, therefore I shall remark in general. Do other presumably confirmed Zodiac offerings collectively serve a mixed media casserole of juvenile, profane, and smart? If agreeing to some, and then for those at real clues, a same origin, would only smart, however immorally applied profile a real suspect? Compare that real suspect with the one distracted to and described by Hartnell. Now, this time, compare the real suspect basing intelligence to Hartnell himself, and moreover the way Hartnell described his story of the Lake Berryessa attack, a suspect of ambiguous attributes, however failing believability as a highly educated moron. If liking Colonel Robert Resslow's criteria, question, as I now do, organized and disorganized serial killers, presuming also Zodiac, itself distortion on whatever level, what do you suppose a better possibility? My direct accusation of Hartnell murdering Cecelia Shepard with sacrificial killings to distort order from purpose by false trend through efficiency murder, following a final gun homicide to move geographic attentions from largesse messaging and expanding distortion profile further, or this imbecile broke costume suspect headed for Mexico that Hartnell alleged. His divergent account descriptions reveal enormous doubt. Although not an accredited profile of myself, a word perhaps not even used back then, I do know that Hartnell would have blundered and used it, would not have blundered and used it. Moreover, so often mentioned compulsion or murder addiction, does that usually apply consistency more towards more directly applied sexual homicides, upscale in violence and thrill kills? I propose that this was about settling one personal score and administering some awesome, elaborate, and unconventional violence to carry out a plan. If agreed, this brutal composite features terror, but would not await confession for credit. If forced to choose from, for now, an admittedly cornered question, did the overall media distortion run consistent with cat and mouse by someone eventually wanting capture, or opposite, someone moving attentions towards the city of San Francisco and then intent upon escape. Again, Hartnell planned to reverse eventual public conclusion of a city offender who first terrorized the suspect and then returned to the city. If agreeing with me that the real suspect within even one amongst the Zodiac framework remains alive, does the at-large question now also confirm the whole puzzle for consistency? If correct, in part or whole, would it also satisfy everyone's standard for difficulty? One last warning. I broadcast wills and trusts, preparing people for their deaths, now as much as can be arranged in their own terms, largely civil, not criminal court, yet still consistency. You only need one lie that at least one person cannot run away from. And by discrediting this interview, I finally leave no room for anybody else who dared match Cecelia Shepard's agreement with Hartnell's story, or for that matter, any plausible boating rescuer's account of the same attack. He described her subsequent to the attack as relax out, running and yelling, and we started talking, back and forth, up and down to Robertson like a puppet master before claiming to have met anyone else on land. I understand that exculpatory evidence will undoubtedly remain, but implore law enforcement to pursue Hartnell. I would bet against anything else that I admit limited familiarity. My foundational hypothesis itself at this point retains risk for now. It obviously leaves many unanswered questions. Confirming evidence with a more fully developed motive from Hartnell towards Cecelia Shepard could complete a theory. Beyond that, I do not understand logistics to legally categorize Hartnell as a suspect and force his compliance to a battery of tests against physical evidence. No lawyer, I know this. Such continues to leave me unwell. My hypothesis anchors upon exclusively inside of only one piece of evidence, and some technician could dispute his evidence at all, convincing some to judge against my evidence with authority, essentially an impression of M. Feurle's impression, all the while never convincing me. Worse, mine cannot offer a completed profile or anonymous approximation of a suspect, but must instead accuse a man, furthermore replacing a flagrantly disingenuous account with a plausible, yet ultimately incomplete one. For Hartnell, still innocent until proven guilty, therefore my description remains right or wrong. For Hartnell, right or wrong, I shall tell you that it, for me, retains consistent with why I continue with sleep disturbances, alone with a weighty set of ideas. I have stranded with a few for first mentioning, but never reasoned with any at all for the merits. I stumbled upon this story upon an admittedly flimsy yet uncomfortable hunch from watching Hartnell during a Bill Curtis documentary roughly 2 years ago, now from 2011, so 12 years ago. First thinking, this is the other stabbing victim? I wanted to remove the suspicion from instinct by reading the interview, during which upon first pass, instinct accelerated into an alarm, not longer exactly sure, but recognizing the accumulation of lies, however audibly shouting, "This is not your victim. This is your perpetrator." I thought Robertson ineffectually handled his part in this interview. I still do. I did not even make it to the finish without first read-through. At the time, I had no idea how much poison embedded in it. Cold case? This interview sat in cryogenic cement approaching a half-century. It was bullshit then, and it is bullshit now. Anybody who first saw or heard a more accurate transcript of what the interview also missed it. I warmed it up and brought it back into solution. For goodness gracious sakes, it has remained 5-star chili sitting in my guts, trying to overcome indifference from legal authority and my own mistakes with a lot of rigid and intolerant protocol obstacles, pretending afterwards from both threat of incarceration as well as false compassion. Does anybody care about the right answers? Does anybody else still want another go-around? But at Bryan William Spellman. And this is my book from www.lulu.com/Bryan_Spellman. The interview, Bryan Spellman's analysis of Bryan Hartnell's interview. And there's a picture of me in 2011 posing with the Zodiac killer of Cecelia Ann Shepard. Thank you. Just like you, my screenplay, in which I talked about this as well.